This is Cathryn Ross, joint CEO of Thames Water and former CEO of the regulation body Ofwat.
We're here today because Thames Water, which you now run, is in a position where the government is having to plan to renationalise you because of a failure of your finances. But you signed off as the chief executive of the regulator in 2014 for Macquarie to ramp up the debt from £3 billion to £10 billion whilst taking out nearly £3 billion in dividends, often paying dividends higher than the profits the company made in particular years. The reason we're in this position and the reason that taxpayers are now potentially on the hook for billions and billions of pounds of national borrowing is because you, as the chief executive of the regulator and the regulator, failed in delivering your statutory duties. Do you want to apologise to the public, Ms Ross?
She's at a committee meeting which is looking into why Thames Water is in such big debt. Will she apologise? We'll have to wait and see. First, we're going to go over to Barry Gardiner, Labour MP, who's quizzing not only Cathryn but another CEO of Thames Water on why they put over £500 million to one side in case of nationalisation.
So now that the views have moved on, what discussions have you had with the government on the potential nationalisation of your company?
None.
None. Why do you think it's being talked about in the press so freely?
Well, I can say that over the last couple of weeks I've read a lot in the press. Some of that was rather more outlandish than perhaps we would have liked. I think.
Well, one of the things that may be outlandish, maybe Mr. Cochrane can come to this, is the way in which you structured, £560 million of debt, just in the case that the government should have to take over the company. Do you want to comment on that, Mr. Cochrane?
Which debt are you referring to?
This is the amount of money that would be payable from your debt should the government would have to pay £560 million off to your debtors.
I don't recognise that figure.
But my question is about the way in which you included a clause in a previous debt issue that would require the government to immediately pay off around £500 million of debt in the case of nationalisation. You don't recognise that clause?
Don't recognise that clause, no.
Okay.
We're going to move on to Sir Adrian Montague, Chair of Thames, before we go back to see if Cathryn will apologise.
Yes, Sir Adrian.
I was going to address your question on nationalisation. If you go back to the very dawn of the private ownership of these utilities, the rationale was to empower the utilities to borrow privately, to use private sector capabilities to drive performance through the operation of the utilities. We say that we have much more to do in that area. But I think the key thing is to remove from the Treasury the burden of funding the improvements to the water sector that we're now managing privately. And that was the driver of privatisation.
But the problem, Sir Adrian, has been that actually, although there has been substantial investment in the infrastructure since privatisation, I absolutely agree with you on that, it hasn't been enough, has it? And that's exactly the point of my colleague Mr. Dunn's questions to your colleague earlier.
And indeed, we've got to increase the flow of that investment. That's what our refinancing package is aiming to do.
What your structure, the structure of the company, not when you were there, Sir Adrian, but what the structure of the company allowed was for an Australian bank to actually leverage the fact that you're a regulated asset to extract money out. Did it not?
Yes, I think that there was a flow of dividends from the company under previous ownership. It's, for us, quite a long time ago, Mr. Gardner. I think it reflected slightly...
It reflects the state of the company now, doesn't it, Sir Adrian?
It reflects, I think, the state of what the markets were and the practices at that time. I can't...
Those practices are still going on, aren't they?
I can't...
Macquarie's doing the same in other regulated industries. And actually, you yourself, I believe, are on one of Macquarie's companies, Cadent, and actually Cathryn Ross is on British Gas Transmission, aren't you?
National Gas Transmission.
National Gas Transition, which are both Macquarie companies. So it seems that there's a very cosy arrangement here.
Yes, all of these parasites seem to move in the same circles. Anyway, there's one correction to be made, though.
I have to correct you, Mr. Gardner. They are not Macquarie companies. They have a range of international investors in them, including, in my case, Chinese and Qatari investors. They're all very responsible investors. They're all seeking to improve the performance of the companies.
How do you feel about his assurance there? Because it certainly doesn't make me feel very comfortable. Corporations from other countries running our utilities. Anyway, back to Cathryn Ross. Will she apologise?
We're here today because Thames Water, which you now run, is in a position where the government is having to plan to renationalise you because of a failure of your finances. But you signed off as the chief executive of the regulator in 2014 for Macquarie to ramp up the debt from £3 billion to £10 billion whilst taking out nearly £3 billion in dividends, often paying dividends higher than the profits the company made in particular years. The reason we're in this position and the reason that taxpayers are now potentially on the hook for billions and billions of pounds of national borrowing is because you, as the chief executive of the regulator and the regulator, failed in delivering your statutory duties. Do you want to apologise to the public, Ms. Ross?
Well, I don't accept that characterisation of
Big shock! What does she accept then?
Ofwat's price control in 2014. The other thing I would say as well is special administration is obviously a matter...
Then she waffles on. How about another go?
So, Ms. Ross, you just said in the 2014 price review you didn't accept that characterisation, but you've just admitted to the committee that you signed off the business plans that allowed Macquarie to increase the debt, which has got Thames Water into the position it's been in. The regulator facilitated this problem, didn't it?
Let me clarify. So, in 2014, the Ofwat board, not just the Ofwat chief executive...
And more waffle.
Ms. Ross, let me ask the question in a different way. Two of the statutory obligations of Ofwat, the water regulator, when it was set up, was one, to protect the interests of customers, and two, to make sure the privatised water companies could finance themselves. On both of those measures, are you seriously telling the committee today that you, as the chief executive of the regulator at the time, succeeded in delivering those statutory obligations in the context that you're before the committee today? Are you really saying that was a success?
I think at the time, when I was at Ofwat, and I believe it to be true today, everybody at Ofwat takes their statutory duties incredibly seriously.
What, did you perform them?
We were exercising our functions in pursuit of our statutory duties. Whether every decision we made was perfect with the benefit of hindsight, possibly not, but that's exactly what we were trying to do.
With the benefit of hindsight, would you like to apologise to the taxpayer for being here and potentially putting them in this position where, yet again, another regulated market could potentially collapse and expose taxpayers to billions of pounds?
I think if you're asking for an apology from Ofwat, I think you should...
Asking for an apology from you, Ms. Ross?
No, I won't apologise for my role
Don't
as
want
the
to
chief
apologise.
executive.
So there you have it. No apology. Click here for a song about Sunak.